I want to mention one other type of relationship. It's not friendship per se, or if it is, we'd call it maybe a spiritual friendship. But by this relationship, I'm talking about a ministry type of relationship. What one might call a mentor-mentoree sort of relationship. Now, these are absolutely crucial to the Christian life. All through the centuries, Christians have entered into seasonal relationships where one is usually pouring into someone and being poured into by someone. Ministry relationships. Now, the challenge with these is that frequently the intensity of both commitment and even openness and honesty and time to these relationships can make them appear as if what's just happened is that a deep, intimate friendship is formed. The problem with that is that ministry relationships usually have a season to them. That's why we have to be very clear with each other. In our cultural context where we don't talk much about the nature of friendship, or really the nature of relationships at all, someone who's being poured into by a mentor, if it's not clear to them, could interpret that pouring into, that commitment and time that's given to them, they could interpret that as the mentor inviting them into their lifelong circle of intimate friends. When in fact what's going on is the mentor is being used by God in this season to pour into, to build, to equip, and to nurture, so that that person can eventually grow up into the maturity of Christ and carry on the mentoring, discipling process. But to not talk about that and to leave those expectations unclear can set each other up for false expectations and therefore for a sense of rejection and hurt. Once again, it comes back to being clear in our communication with each other about each type of relationship and what each of us think it is. You know, in my context of teaching as a college professor, I'll often hear my students talking about having a DTR. What they mean by that is a defining the relationship conversation. Now, what's interesting is every time I've ever heard them talk about this, it's always defining a romantic relationship. Two people who aren't quite sure where they stand. Are we going out? Are we dating? Are we exclusive? And so they define the relationship. What I'd like to propose is we take that concept, DTRing, and use that for a wider range of relationships. I think a lot of friendships need a DTR conversation. Define the relationship. If we are mismatched in our expectations, what I'll call relational or asymmetrical relational expectations. By that, I mean someone expects that the relationship is here. That's what they're operating with. And another person thinks it's here in terms of commitment or openness or time. That mismatch allows this person to feel rejected by this person, and this person who's expecting less to feel smothered by this person. This happens so frequently in friendships. I remember that Greg and I were doing a Q&A on relationships some years ago. After this Q&A evening, a woman who was at the Q&A happened to bump into me about 3 weeks later at another event. And she told me this story. She said that she had brought her friend to the Q&A event. Now, her friend wasn't a Christian, but she was willing to come and kind of listen to some conversation around relationships. And this woman told me that while they were there that night, that I had shared this rather brief episode where I talked about friendship and the importance of clarifying expectations so we don't end up asymmetrical. Tension, right? And she said that on their way home, they had talked about this, and that her friend had said to her, you know, we've been best friends for 30 years. She said, but we've never talked about our expectations. And this began a conversation, she said, in which the friend told her, she said, I've been a better friend to you than you've been to me. She said, think about it, all these years, who usually calls who? Who usually initiates going out and doing something? She said, usually it's me, and you usually are the one who just responds. And she shared that that had made her feel hurt and rejected over the years. Well, the woman telling me this said that she was then able to say, look, you are my best friend, but you're not my only friend, and I have a husband and kids, and you know what? I've felt through the years as if there's too much of an expectation on my time. And she said that within 30 minutes on the drive home, they got out on the table, in conversation, a 30-year tension that had been in their relationship for all this time. They just never talked about it. I'd propose that most friendships with that kind of a tension between them don't last 30 years. You wonder how many friendships have ended simply because of this mismatched expectations that were never talked about. We need to talk through our relationships with our friends. As we do, as we begin to become intentional about our friendships, we'll find that there's a number of challenging and complex factors that come into this. Again, technology is one of them. How do we manage the fact that someone can have thousands of Facebook friends, realizing that we can only manage a very few number of friends at the intimate and good levels unless we start squandering our time? It's a challenge. It's going to be part of what it means to live in this technological culture, is to think through this prayerfully with God and allot and partition our resource of time wisely. There's going to be the challenge of expectations and how we match them as opposed to mismatching them. Again, this will only come through conversation. There's going to be the fact that some people, when they have that conversation, are going to find that they just have different expectations generally to the friendship. What do we do when one person sees another person as their best friend, but this person just sees this person as a good friend or even a casual friend? At this point, there's no easy answers, but there is the importance of talking through, being honest and vulnerable, finding out how to compromise when these mismatched expectations are discovered in a relationship. Then there's even more complicating factors. What do we do if two people do see the relationship roughly similar? Let's say they both want to be good friends, but then they discover that one of them's an extrovert and one's an introvert. Even though they're both good friends, an introvert is going to have a different definition of time together than an extrovert will. And once again, conversation and compromise are going to be required for this friendship to stay healthy. Add to this the complexity of cultural differences, and things can even become more complex. In the modern North American context, we do friendship generally in certain ways that are very different from how friendship is done, let's say, on the African continent, or in certain Asian contexts, and on and on. And so once we start crossing barriers culturally in terms of friendship, it even makes it more important to have intentional conversations, feedback loops, ways of processing friendships, such that we don't allow inner tensions to go underground, to become submerged, and to ultimately destroy the fabric of the relationship. All of this can be done as we become intentional about thinking about the nature of friendship, the dynamics of friendship, and how we intentionally move through life caring for these precious relationships that God has given us.